Have you ever considered your country the greatest, strongest power in the world and wanted to invade your massively larger neighbors? Probably not. Well, that's what happened when Paraguay initiated the War of the Triple Alliance. As you might expect, it didn't go very well. This is how Paraguay lost 70% of its male population in just 6 years. To start with, we have to talk about territorial disputes. At the time, every country that bordered Paraguay had disputed territory with it. This is because of old treaties between Portugal and Spain, the former rulers of these nations. For instance, the dispute with Brazil was whether the border was at the Apa or the Branco River. Additionally, all nations involved wanted control of the entire Plantain Basin. This wasn't the actual major tipping point, which was instead the Uruguay War. Before the war, two big government parties were fighting for control of Uruguay, the Blancos and the Colorados. The Blancos were in power in Uruguay and had exiled the Colorados. Paraguay had been allied with the Blancos. However, the exiled leaders of the Colorados returned to Uruguay and started a rebellion against the Blancos, supported by Argentina and Brazil, greatly souring relationships between Paraguay and the Great Powers. Paraguay attempted to get them to stop supporting the rebels, but to no avail. Eventually, Brazil even fully joined the war, siding with the Colorados. Argentina had also become involved in Uruguay. Paraguay sent them a letter, but Argentina denied any involvement. This is the point where Asuncion began to prepare for war, implementing a mandatory military service and recruiting an additional 64,000 troops. Paraguay also soon took a Brazilian ship that had docked in Asuncion. As it left, a Paraguayan ship was sent after them, shot, and ordered them to return. Everyone on board was arrested. The ship was later turned into a warship during the Paraguayan War. On the 30th of August, 1864, Paraguay sent an ultimatum to Brazil, demanding that they withdraw from Uruguay, as stability in the Plantain region was at the utmost of importance to them. Brazil instead began defending Mato Grosso, and after reaffirming the ultimatum, Paraguay declared war. Paraguay was the first to take action, and on the 14th of December 1864, they began their invasion into the Brazilian province of Mato Grosso. After 3 days, they were successful. They continued north and took the cities of Albuquerque, Taiz, and Corumba due to their large army. Next, they sent troops to the Corrientes and Rio Grande do Sul, but required Argentina's permission to move troops to aid the Uruguayan Blancos. Argentina refused, and Paraguay declared war on them. At this time, the Uruguay War was still ongoing, but not for long, as the combined Brazilian and Colorado forces were able to defeat the Blancos by besieging towns and capturing them one by one. The nations at war with Paraguay, namely Brazil and Argentina, along with Uruguay, who had just ended their civil war, formed the Triple Alliance against Paraguay. With Paraguay surrounded by enemies, it seems like the tide of war should have been shifted, but it didn't. Just remember, throughout the war, Paraguay had a total of 300,000 militants, while the alliance had just 175,000 combined. However, Paraguay was significantly weakened by President Lopez, who was a very poor military leader. Whenever there was a defeat, mostly due to him, it was followed by executions and hard discipline, resulting in exhausted and demoralized troops. The Triple Alliance's unthought of strength was first shown after an assault on the fortress of Umita in the Battle of Tayuchi, which was considered as the gateway to Paraguay. The battle was a strong victory for the Triple Alliance, leading to more than 12,000 Paraguayan casualties. By the Battle of Sós and Boqueirão, Paraguay had recovered, now only having 2,000 casualties, but still lost to Brazil in the Battle of Curuzu, as they stormed another fort, demolishing Paraguay's effort to recover from the war. Following this, the Allies attacked at the Battle of Quirapachi, but it would prove to be disastrous for them as they lost 20% of their combined military while Paraguay lost less than 100 men. After this, the Allies' advance briefly came to a stop. Paraguay did, however, manage to break Argentina's line during the Second Battle of Tayuchi, but suffered the loss of 2,500 men, twice as many as the Allies lost. In key battles, the Allies had captured Villeta, which forced Paraguay to evacuate their capital of Asuncion. It was then occupied in January, although General Lopez was able to evade capture for another year before attacking a Brazilian general, which led to Lopez's death. After this, the Paraguayans lost hope and surrendered. The Allies ended up being the victors of the war. In the final treaty, Paraguay lost control over almost all disputed territories, as the disputes with Bolivia remained, and in total, 140,000 square kilometers, or 54,000 square miles, were lost to Argentina and Brazil. Argentina gained the lands between the Rio Barramillo and Rio Picamayo, called Formosa. Additionally, they gained the lands between the Uruguay River and Rio Paraná, called Misiones. Also, disputed territory between both Brazil and Argentina was in the eastern area of Misiones, eventually becoming part of Brazil. Finally, Brazil gained their disputed territories north of the Apa River, leaving Paraguay to only have disputes with Bolivia, which was not involved in the war. However, these would later be dissolved after the Chaco War. For Paraguay, the effects were devastating. First, they had lost 70% of their male population and about 50% of their total population, causing an immense lack of labor and drastically reducing potential for reproduction. Their sex ratio changed 4-to-1, meaning that there were nearly 4 women per man, and more than half the women would never be able to find a spouse. Additionally, this caused women to have a more active role in the workforce and increased gender equality in the nation. Modern-day low marriage rates and high numbers of out-of-wedlock babies are attributed to this. They also had much of their towns and resources destroyed during the war. These factors saw the ruin of the Paraguayan economy. They developed far slower than their neighbors and had high debt, making the country even poorer. After this, the country would never fully recover, today only having a $5,000 GDP per capita compared to Brazil's $7K, Argentina's $10K, and Uruguay's $17,000 GDP per capita. They have also been nothing more than a buffer state between Brazil and Argentina ever since. The war also saw its peak influence on Brazil and helped to end slavery in the nation. Although with mountains of debt, the country also developed slowly. This eventually led to the fall of the Brazilian Empire and the rise of the First Brazilian Republic. In Argentina, the war caused economic growth through selling supplies to Brazil, although they spent most of their money in the national treasury. It also strengthened the nation into the second great power in South America. In Uruguay, the casualties were not as severe. The war also helped the Colorados to retain power in the government until 1958. This war ended up being one of the bloodiest in human history, and the single bloodiest for an individual country by percentage of population. This huge amount of blood spilled is incredibly unfortunate, and hopefully nothing happens at the same scale ever again. If you want to help us continue to grow the channel, click the subscribe button and the like button. It really helps us out. Also, we do make sure to read all of your comments, so if you have anything to say, please do feel free to share it in the comments or join the Discord in the description.